we are not talking about LLMs like ChatGPT. In this context, what are we talking about here? Einar.
Okay, so when you start talking about AI, there's a lot of hype. A lot of people, including in this room, will use a lot of jargon and things like that. So I'm just somebody who's interested. So I'm not an expert, but I can tell you this. On one side, you have these algorithmic queries. This is everyone talks about. This is what AI is supposed to be. But what's on the other side? Data. And if you don't have data, you don't have any ability to do anything in terms of crunching the numbers. So today we're going to talk a little bit in terms of setting the stage about just how important this is in China's approach to it. So, to you.
Yeah. I also think, because when we think about artificial intelligence, most of us think about LLMs and chatbots. You know, in the future, right now, but also in the future, we'll see artificial intelligence permeate a range of sectors and industries and clusters of technologies. So it's really hard to say that AI is a specific cluster of technologies because it cuts across everything. There is the one, I think, sector of hard technology that does make sense to talk about when we talk about AI, and that's semiconductors. And I think that's going to be especially relevant in this conversation where we'll talk a little bit about the strategy of developing AI and commercializing it and applying it in the real economy in the United States versus that of China.
Thank you, Jussi. Yeah, we'll definitely come back to that. But let's have a think then. We have these two strategically divergent approaches to developing AI, don't we? Let's have a quick summary. Einar, could you perhaps summarize China's approach?
All right, so China is very much in terms of putting it together. And what I mean by that is China is using AI tools as well as digital ones to improve its manufacturing logistics. It's all about making sense of it. It is not build it and they will come. You'll notice early this year, China told all these people who were building these great big data centers that they needed to stop. Why? There's overcapacity. In the United States today, 52% of all investment that was done in 2024 was on AI centers. What's the problem? Well, right now, they're building it and hoping the solutions and the profitability will come. How realistic is that? China looked at this and said, no, it isn't. We already have too much. So they have closed it down, pretty much. And why is that important? Because what goes into an AI center, all right? You have the chips, all right? Right now, NVIDIA is at the top of the level. China doesn't trust the chips that are coming from the US. Why? Because Donald Trump said, you make secondary chips for them. And the Chinese feel that maybe these chips have been tampered with. Maybe they have an on-off switch. Okay? Maybe they send back data, because that's certainly what the US has said about China. All Chinese tech is, and all advancements are suspicious. All Chinese people, in fact, anybody who isn't, quote, American, is suspicious. So right now you have a sense that China is trying to do practical things. They're all about planning. Every 5 years they come up with a new plan, they come up with another one, and they've talked and emphasized that AI is going to be part of that, but AI innovation. That means they're going to have a complete supply chain within China. Why? Because the US said, we don't want you to. Now, the big question that you've all been wanting to know is what's happening with rare earths. What is it that China's going to do with its, quote, monopoly? Well, there's a push and pull to this. If China slaps down hard curbs on getting these kinds of rare earth elements, other countries will come up with solutions. It will take them 5 to 7 years, just if they are looking for strategic value, and that means defense industry. It would take 10 to 15 years to do what is necessary to bring it up to speed. Why? Rare earths are not rare. They're all over the world. The issue is, how do you process them? And China, despite you hear the 90% number, the number you should really think about is 98% of rare earth magnets are made in China. That means they have a stranglehold. Do they want to use that to bludgeon the world? No. They did this in response to what the US has done in terms of saying that we won't give you chips or access to chip-making facilities. And China is making a point. Donald Trump, you will remember, said he's not going to allow American avionics to go to China, and China is dependent on them. They can't make their airplanes without the avionics. But here's the thing. He said Boeing won't send them. China sent a message. Boeing won't be able to make them to send to us without rare earths.
So, Jostein, China's approach is very much focusing on applying existing technologies. So, across from that, Silicon Valley, what is their approach? How is it different?
Well, I know I touched upon a little bit of this already, but I think the key here, first in understanding China's approach, is practical application and as part of state planning, long-term economic development plans that are led by the state. This is an approach that China has that I would say distinguishes it from the US approach, especially in terms of AI. So China has certain ideas about what it wants to achieve for productivity growth, for economic growth, for technological development, for technological sovereignty, and AI is sort of secondary to those things. And China will, for sure, spearhead AI even more, but it's guided by these things, these plans that is set by the state. Whereas in the US, on the other hand, you have venture capitalist investors that spearhead the approach more so. It has led and it will lead to more innovation, but the actual practical applications are a bit more uncertain. The long-term outcome with this approach that Silicon Valley has is a little bit more uncertain. It might lead to increased share prices of tech companies. You'll also see more desire for short-term profits because of stock buybacks and so on. But it is more a venture capitalist-centric approach where you don't see as clearly the benefits immediately to the real economy. There are, of course, some caveats here. So, for example, under the Biden administration, the US implemented something called the Chips and Science Act. You might see this as kind of hard technology, but it is, of course, AI-related because it's a move by the US to try and locate more of the semiconductor industry and supply chain within the United States. But this is, more secondary to the private sector for-profit-driven approach, whereas in China it is purely led by the agenda set by the state for long-term planning.
Are these different approaches quite reflective of their sort of a historical approach to development, to progress?
In China, very much so, I would say. I mean, these 5-year plans and some other ancillary plans like Made in China 2025 that was launched in 2015, and that's been a big part of developing AI infrastructure in China. I mean, these plans have been part and parcel of the modern state of China for decades, going back to Mao. So, interestingly, Mao, he said in a speech in 1955 that it would take something like 15 5-year plans to catch up with the United States. And here we are with the 15th 5-year plan being launched, and China is on the verge of catching up with the United States. So it seems like he almost had a crystal ball. But this kind of planning, has actually, we might not think of this kind of economic planning and industrial planning and planning for technological development. We might not think of that as part of economic policy in the US, but this used to be very, very central to the United States going far back to the 1800s. Alexander Hamilton is one of the founding fathers of the United States. He wrote plenty of economic planning documents as to how the United States should technologically catch up with Great Britain, which was the technological and industrial powerhouse at the time. He wrote many such reports and documents that he submitted to Congress. So there is a history of this in the United States as well, but maybe not as clear in the present day.
So out of the two then, who is playing the long game? Who is looking towards the future more? In my view, I would have thought that it was Silicon Valley, but maybe that's not true. Einar.
Okay, there's an old saying, he who travels alone travels fastest. That is Silicon Valley. It is the incentive to the individual, to the company, to become innovative. So you move quickly, but those who travel together travel furthest. That is China. China, as my colleague pointed out, has these incredible plans. And every year, they have to give a report card on exactly what they promised to do the year before, exactly what they promised to do as part of the original 5-year plan. So they trot along. It's a long-term prospect. We all know that those who plan will succeed, those who do not will not. So at this point, I would definitely give it to China. And if you, as entrepreneurs, are looking at how you can be part of the China market, all right, you have to start planning now in terms of your IP. Because the one thing I'm certain of is that there's going to be a complete divide between many developed nations who choose to support the US and the global South who probably will go a different way. You're already seeing the regional blocks appear, whether it's BRICS, SCO, whether RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, 40% of the world's GDP, majority of the world's population. These are the big markets you should be planning. It doesn't have to go to China, but you should be thinking about how exactly you're going to monetize your quickness.
Yeah, on this question, I think it's quite, the answer for me is quite unambiguously China in terms of which nation has implemented long-term planning as part and parcel of its economic policy making, as part of its technological policy making. Now, this is not to say that planning isn't absent in the U.S. or even that the U.S. is the most, in many ways, in many sectors, the most innovative country in the world. And it has, with Silicon Valley, it has spearheaded innovation globally for years. But when we talk about long-termism and when we talk about planning, the system that the United States has in place at the moment, in some ways, is hurting itself, because we see that, especially political polarization and the way that democracy has evolved in the US, you have one presidential administration just simply trying to undo what the previous presidential administration has done, if that was the opposing political party. And so somewhat unfortunately, you may say that this system of liberal democracy hasn't played out the way that you'd want to see it if you care about long-term visions and technological development in the United States.
You've touched on this already a little bit, but let's focus a bit more on the risks of the two different approaches. Is there a risk that China could miss out by not looking more towards along that more innovative, approach that Silicon Valley is taking? What do you think, Einar? Are there any risks to their approach?
No, I would disagree on that. If you start looking at the number of engineers, we're talking about a human resource game here. Everyone will acknowledge that. So if you have more engineers, more experts, you're going to do better. So the idea that somehow if you're Asian that you can do math but you're not innovative, I think those ideas are now dead. When you start looking at what China's been able to do, don't take it as a racial issue. It is simply about the brain power and the number of people that can be put on task to create it. Look at Huawei. Huawei, I'm an American, we've been trying to kill them for ages, and yet they continue to emerge as #1 in their market, and they expand throughout the global south. And this is what I'm really talking about. China has the manpower, they have the planning. It is not a complete nirvana, all right? I still think that the entrepreneurialism that within America is a very potent factor. But as my colleague has pointed out, you have no certainty. You have no ability to predict what will happen next, and this is the problem with the US as it stands.
Justin, your thoughts?
Sure. If you had asked me 10 years ago about, is there a chance that China will miss out, or is there a chance that this approach might not lead to breakthroughs at the technological frontier, my answer might have been different.
Yeah.
But all of us have been shocked, I think, almost on a monthly basis with a new innovation coming out of China. So, at this point, it's only a matter of time before we see China at the technological frontier across a range of technologies and industries. We're already, seeing it in green technologies, in EVs, in robotics, and we're soon going to see it in semiconductors, in AI. I mean, this is becoming slowly, but quite certainly an innovation powerhouse in the world. It's transitioned pretty fast, I would say, from imitation, from technological imitation to technological innovation, really at a pace and a scale that we haven't seen in modern history.
And what about the talk of a potential AI bubble bursting? Einar, do you have any concerns about that AI bubble bursting?
AI?
The bubble bursting,
Well, I mean, we're involved in a bubble right now. I think if all of you start looking at the stock market and the profits, although corporate profits were very high, you start looking at unemployment, you start looking at global uncertainty. Outside the markets of building these AI centers, these data centers, America is actually behind. And it's not being guided unless, as somebody who ran businesses, I could not invest in the US unless I saw that I could get all of my money back plus my profit before Donald Trump leaves. Otherwise, we're back to your point. There will be a complete reversal. And I would say I used to run elections in the US. I can say almost with certainty that the next president will not be like this president, and they'll probably try to undo many of the things he's done. No certainty. So that is the real danger here. But China, I think, will, as I said, they will go far. The question is, can America return to being faster?
Jostein, your thoughts very quickly on the AI bubble.
It's hard to say, but I did hear a leading economist in the US, Jason Furman, said that obviously expectations are supposed to be built into the stock market. I see the mechanisms at play that are pointing towards an AI bubble, but this economist said that, he pointed out to his own stock portfolio saying, I'm hugely invested in tech and I'm not taking anything out because, a lot of people are talking about this bubble and prices are supposed to reflect expectations. And he still believes that this is a sector that's, really growing fast and is supposed to growing fast. And, we're seeing that to some degree in the real economy as well. But, I don't want to say this with certainty because I haven't studied specifically the bubble with great fervor. So I'm not the super expert on this.
And then finally, because I'm conscious we're getting towards the end, which option is the more sustainable, Einar?
What do you mean?
Which approach is the more sustainable, do you think, at the moment,
right.
looking at it at the moment?
So when you're looking at different systems, the issue is you should be trying to take advantage of the strengths of each. In the US, you have much more freedom in terms of, as I said, going fast, putting things together. You have a tremendously mature economic financial system, right? You have terrific universities, but China is catching up. You start looking globally at what it does. Now let's look at the weak part. In the US, they said this CHIPS Act that Biden was going to put together was supposed to be building these factories. Where are they? They're behind schedule, they're over budget. They cannot do that. Why? Because they have to import all the engineers from Taiwan. And it's two sets of engineers, one to build it and a second to operate it. And there is no school that is teaching this. You either have the knowledge and you're at the forefront, because every single new fab factory is a new beginning. And unless you've had the experience of doing it before, you can't do it again. So how is the US going to catch up like this? You can't train somebody on the job. And right now, the US is failing at that. China is taking the other approach. They have the manpower, the engineers to try to learn it. They're doing it indigenously. The Taiwanese are not giving them the technology. But I do believe that they will catch up and they will surpass the US.
I know we've been comparing, obviously, China and the US a lot in this session, but I also want to caveat that a bit by saying, you know, these are two economies that have gone through very different transformations in the past few decades and have slightly different objectives. So going back to the 1980s, you know, no one would think of comparing China technologically with the United States. So China's objective is a bit different. They've gone through still going through a process of rapid transformation, still in some ways trying to catch up, although they're leading across many industries now, but still in this process of rapid technological, economic development and so on, and they're trying to plan long term with that objective in mind, to deliver on rapid economic development for its people. And that's also how the state legitimizes itself. Whereas I think the challenge for the US at this point is also dealing with another nation that is catching up. So how will the US respond to China's rise? How will the US respond to gradually losing its hegemony in the global economic order? Will it start building more partnerships based off of mutual cooperation, respect for sovereignty, and so on? Or will it kind of cling on to more of a hegemonic role? So I think the challenges are a bit different there, and I would be a bit cautious about saying sort of which of the approaches are more sustainable for the long term, because they face, you know, the two countries face slightly different challenges.
Absolutely. It'll be fascinating to see what happens in the next 5 or 10 years. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you everyone for joining us for the last talk of the day.